Good morning. It is January 6th here, bright and early. For some of us, it's very bright and early out on the West Coast. This is our second webinar of the series here. This morning, we're going to get to planting some seeds about some agricultural meteorology, not a topic I'm too well aware of, but I'm willing to learn quite a bit this morning. We have a full cast and crew this morning. We'll get to those here in just a minute or two, but I do want to talk a little bit about how to ask questions here later on the webinar. There's 3 ways to do that. We will be popping up Mike's email here in just a second for questions directly to Mike. There is also a Q&A link on both the YouTube page and the Google Plus page, which I'm assuming if you're watching you have found. You can go ahead and look at that. I will be perusing that as well. Also, finally, I will be using a hashtag monitoring that, and that will be also up on the slides that I'll be showing here in a second. That hashtag is hashtag NWA Web, W-E-B. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mike now. Mike Mogul is a digital seal holder. He is also the runner and operator of How the Weather Works down in Naples, Florida, and he can tell you more about himself as well. Go ahead and unmute yourself there, Mike.
Okay, good morning, everybody. And it's 9 o'clock here in the east and the ungodly hour of 6 o'clock in the west, so good morning. Listen, Amy Hadachek, who's going to chair the panel in a few moments, and I talked about it and proposed an article to Weatherwise magazine about agricultural weather. And based on that article and all of the research that Amy uncovered, this webinar came out of the Professional Development Committee at NWA, so we're just like thrilled that we're able to present it here. I'm going to sort of do the overall moderation, but Amy is going to chair the panel. I'll come back and visit you sometime during the program and then again at the end. But what I want to just do is mention very quickly again Weatherwise magazine. I'll say more about that at the closing of the program. But if you're not a subscriber to it, it does have great articles for lay audiences and also for the professionals. And a lot of meteorologists write for it on a routine basis. So check it out at weatherwise.org. And with that, I just want to go to the next slide, which I think shows our article. I should have done that a moment ago. Are you there? He's not, so I won't worry about the slides. But I'm just going to mention that one of the things that came up in the discussion, which I think is slide 4, is population growth around the world. And in doing some checking, I guess I hadn't looked at this in a long time, but we're supposed to be at over 9 billion people on planet Earth by 2050. And given that number globally and the growth in U.S. population, farmers are going to have to be very, very effective producers of food. So since weather affects farming and farming affects us, that's where this article came from. And that's where this webinar came from. So with that, it's to you, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Mike, and good morning, everyone. And we have a really exciting hour. First, I want to mention that agriculture weather forecasts were largely available through the National Weather Service until 1996, and then they were transferred to the private sector. So because of that, the private sector is largely following this, in addition to National Weather Service forecast products, which they still offer from the Weather Service: the weekly drought monitor, monthly and seasonal precipitation, and temperature outlooks and watches and warnings and advisories for everyone. Our main goal today is to educate National Weather Association, which we'll now call NWA for everyone's purpose, meteorologists on the NWA webinar about what farmers and ranchers need in their forecasts. It's all about helping the people who grow our food. And to be sure that each person gets his or her most important question answered today, please ask or answer your top question as concisely as you can. Then if there's time, we'll have another go-round. Now our panelists, we have 3 farmers who will get to speak first and provide their top concern. Then several meteorologists who have joined us will each get to respond to farmers' needs, also as quickly as you can, and we'll get back to you. And we also have an agriculture publication editor. First, Larry Hadachek, owner-farmer of a diversified crop and livestock farm in north central Kansas. And we're going to start with Larry. After I moved here 5 years ago, I had never before actually heard anyone talk about weather, I got to tell you, as much as I have heard farmers and ranchers do. Precipitation chances or lack thereof seem to be foremost on the minds of Central Plains farmers. And Larry, since we heard this a lot with you, what are some of your greatest frustrations? You've got a lot of meteorologists listening.
Well, in our situation here and stuff, every morning before I go out and stuff, I always check the forecast because that has a lot to do with what I'm going to do that day. And one of the things is when I'm putting up alfalfa or prairie hay, you cut it, put it down, put it in a windrow, and then 2 days later you bale it. And a lot of times I look at the forecast and they say, well, no chance of rain or anything like that. And so I'll put it down, and then unfortunately we might get some moisture in the next couple of days before I can get it baled. So that's a frustration. And there's instances where we might have there might be a high precipitation forecast, like an 80% chance of rain, and nothing happens. Another situation like spraying and stuff, when we spray crops. You don't. Once you spray, it has to be a certain time period where it stays dry, so that the chemical will stay on the plant. And so, sometimes there's a forecast that says, well, there won't be any rain in the morning, but there'll be in the afternoon. So you go out and spray in the morning, and sure enough, like 30 minutes later, it starts raining. So that kind of washes the herbicide off. So it's kind of frustrating at times. You kind of go by the forecast, and they're just not. It's not 100% accurate. And I understand that weather is so changeable, but that's part of our frustrations, I guess.
And Dale, are you on with me? Just if you would just say yes or no, and then I'll introduce you.
Yes, thank you. I am on. I hope you can hear me.
Okay. Dale Moeller is a meteorologist as well, and he's with us this morning. And Dale, I really appreciate you being here. He's an AccuWeather meteorologist. If you could respond directly to Larry at this point, and then after that I want to get Pete, another farmer, to talk about his main question. But if you could answer, what improvements do you think, Dale, could be made or have been made lately to weather models or tools, satellite radar, surface observing systems to assist farmers in making big decisions based on weather?
Yeah, I hear where you're coming from on that. I grew up on a farm, so I can relate a little bit. It's been many years since I've been doing that sort of work. I've been here in the office forecasting, so I'm on the other end now. And I wish that I could tell you we're 100%, but as you know, we're not. We're probably 80 or 85%. When I started 30 years ago, you could probably trust the forecast out about 48 hours. Now I think it's about the same level of accuracy out to 7 or 8 days. So there's been progress made, but there's still a lot that needs to be made. And I think part of it is some of the systems that come through here are more on the mesoscale than on the synoptic scale. And so they sort of they're small enough that they sort of slip between the cracks, so to speak. And once in a while you'll get one of those, and it'll trigger some rain that on a day that the forecast probability might be 10%. But I think one of the ways that we can make up for this as a meteorologist is if we're able to speak to someone personally, maybe spend a few minutes a day and give you the ideas of what things that can go wrong. That's not going to solve everyone's problem because we can't talk to 100,000 farmers at once. But so I mean I think that's one step that maybe that could be taken that isn't being done right now. As far as I know, there isn't a whole lot of consulting being done. But as far as model accuracy, that's what most of the forecasts are based on, the computer models, and so there isn't a whole lot of human input involved anymore. The models do need to be worked on and improved. And that's been happening. I think over a period of time there's been an increase in accuracy, but still these smaller systems slip through sometimes. Maybe there isn't enough data on the input. Maybe it's not being looked at carefully enough. The European computer model, by the way, it's still consistently a little more accurate than the American model, but the American model has made strides and it's catching up. And so there are also some smaller, shorter-term models that have more ability to pick up the smaller features, and they are doing better, but they're only maybe good for 6 or 12 hours, and on certain parameters, not so much on precipitation as some of the other things. And precipitation is one of those key factors that that you guys make a lot of your decisions based on, and I understand that. And it is frustrating on our end to be wrong sometimes when it looks like a 0% day and you get a thunderstorm in the afternoon. But maybe it's something that could be picked up on if you talk to a meteorologist and he can say, yeah, there's about a 1 in 10 chance that this small disturbance could trigger a thunderstorm. And then you sort of look for it. Yeah, it may pop up by 2 o'clock. If you don't see it by 2 o'clock, then your odds are pretty good that it's not going to happen, that sort of thing, for example. So I think the
well, thank you, Dale. That's really insightful, and thank you for your honesty too. You know, about the fact that things aren't perfect. And Dale, thank you. I'm going to get back to you in just a moment too. I know that Nikki, our editor, only has about another 10 minutes. Before I have her come on, I would like to ask Pete, another one of our farmers. Pete's joining us. Pete Spike from South Florida, my childhood hometown, Fort Lauderdale-Davie area. And Pete, I know your concerns in Florida are more about temperatures, and I'm going to get Tim Marquis to answer you in just a moment. He's a meteorologist too, and then we'll go to Nikki. But Pete, how many days in advance would you like to know about a freeze so you could prepare? I guess that's one of your main concerns, right?
Well, that's certainly a concern. Can everybody hear me okay, first of all?
Yes, you're fine. Thanks, Pete.
That is certainly a concern that happens once every so often, but along with freezes, you know, we're growing citrus outdoors, and everything affects the way it is perennial crop. So we have all these growth events, the phenology of the tree that happen through the year, and we use weather data and weather information to predict what may happen with the trees and also to analyze what happened in the past. So, for example, this year we had fruit quality issues with the amount of sugar in the fruit, and we're going back and looking at the weather to see what resulted in that situation. So we also participated with the University of Florida a few years back to build computer models where we can predict diseases by looking at the weather forecast and estimating whether or not a disease was going to develop in the future so we could go and spray. But of course the freezes are the big thing. Predicting weather in Florida is what makes forecasters old and gray, because we're surrounded by water. We're a tropical environment most of the time, except when an air mass, Arctic air mass, comes down over us. So knowing about freezes and even a degree here and there, an hour here and there, makes a difference in the way we cold protect with water, irrigation, and that sort of thing.
Okay, and thank you, Pete. And Tim Marquis, who's a meteorologist with WDT Warning Decision Technologies in Norman, Oklahoma. Tim, at agriculture conferences, you've learned that if the ag industry doesn't increase current agricultural output by 75% by the year 2050 based on population trends, that we aren't going to be able to feed the populace. So every field of agriculture needs something different. How could you maybe give a concise answer for Pete and for Larry?
Sure. So for Pete, you know, I think one of the great things you mentioned is understanding historical weather. I think that's a piece we sometimes forget about as meteorologists. And what's really interesting about understanding freeze events is you need really high resolution gridded data. I know a lot of farmers are in that mindset where you want to look at your weather station and that's what you always default to, but a lot of growers don't have stations close enough to them. So how we compensate for that is that we actually go through and blend with high-resolution short-term models, kind of what the folks are talking about at AccuWeather, where you're taking 3-kilometer forecast models that have terrain influences and incorporates tens of thousands of sensors, where we can give you an accurate picture of where the cold air mass is, and then that information feeds our short-term models. So it's a feedback mechanism where we can improve forecasts to help growers understand where freeze events are likely to occur in very short-term time periods. So I think also talking to a meteorologist is very valuable. I don't know so much for growers, but I think agronomists, that would be a really good group of folks to call a meteorologist in the morning and help advise the growers in his areas where frost is more likely to occur, or even precipitation trends. So kind of those are services that are actually available today that we help provide growers. I know in your one use case about citrus, we worked on the other end with canola in Canada and Saskatoon. This May, they got 20 or a couple million acres wiped out by a frost event May 30th that weather stations didn't actually report it in the southwest part of the province, which were sometimes the closest station to a grower. But gridded weather products that we provided helped show that 8 hours of frost or below freezing temperatures occurred at these farms to help them understand what happened.
That sounds interesting. Okay, great, Pete. Thank you. Tim, thank you so much. And we're going to get to our other farmer, Mark, in just a moment. But I know Nikki, our editor, and I also want to mention we are also. Oh, Pete, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Well, I just appreciated what Tim had to say, and I would be real interested in seeing the gridded product that you're talking about. We use the NWS Point Forecast right now. I don't know if that's the same or similar product to what you're talking about, or whether yours is different. But I use that a lot in the wintertime, and we also use it even in the disease prediction models where we can key into the point forecast and import the numerical data in terms of what the temperature and rainfall and humidity are going to be, plug that in the disease development pest models, and predict whether or not we're going to have to spray. So yes, those new developments of the point forecast, the grid model you're talking about, have really been helpful, and we use those a lot.
Pete, thank you so much. Well, stay here with us too, and we're going to get to Mark Nowak, our farmer from Minnesota, in a moment. But I know that Nikki, and as I mentioned, I wanted to also certainly say we were blessed to have on our executive director of the National Weather Association, Janice Bunting. We'll hear from her in a few minutes. Nikki's got a time deadline. She's actually at the office. She's the editor of The Fence Post, which is an agriculture publication, goes out to all 50 states each week. It's amazing that the Fence Post puts that out every week. It just startles me, even though I freelance write for them as well. Nikki, good morning. And as editor, how often do you hear crop and livestock producers talk about weather, and what are they saying?
Wow, I hear it all the time. I was going through this morning and looking at all of the coverage that myself and our other reporters have done over the past couple years on this subject, and it touches every story we do, really. I grew up in Colorado, and so something I've heard my entire life is the unpredictability of weather. We always say it changes within the hour here, and until I started covering agriculture, I thought that the changes of weather were just this minor inconvenience. I never realized how big of an impact it really has. And we cover it in such a huge variety of ways, and once I started seeing just how much it can be of benefit and how much it can be of detriment, I saw how important weather can really be to the agriculture industry. We've covered it in such positive ways after it can be such a detriment. For example, in spring 2014, I did a story about after a long time of looking at the devastating floods that happened in Colorado in September of 2013 as being this really, really terrible event, which they were. Our wheat farmers had record-breaking yields. And so it's really interesting to see such a terrible weather event end up really shaping things differently for our farmers. And then you see a long spring rainy season in 2015 made our corn farmers have a really difficult time getting their corn crops in the ground on time. And some of them even ended up having to plant alternative crops or buy different seed. Or some of them had to risk cutting their yield in half and not being profitable that season. And then around the same time in Nebraska and Kansas, I interviewed a lot of people who were really worried about whether or not the crops that they had just planted were going to be able to survive the massive hailstorms they were getting. I interviewed a gentleman who lived 4 miles from a massive tornado that ripped through a small town, and he told me that he was so lucky that his farm didn't get decimated. And it's amazing to see the resilience of farmers in the face of these storms that come through year after year and have the potential to make their crops and their yields be everything they need to be to sustain their lifestyle, but also could really change their entire way of living for a year. And weather impacts our readers and the industry we cover more than just about everything else. And there's really few topics as important to our farmers. And especially in the West, the water supply is one of the biggest topics that we cover. And I mean, that relates directly to the weather. And there are very few topics that relate quite as much. And so there are complete unknowns that we cover as well, as far as climate change and what the water supply is going to look like in 10, 20, 50 years. So there are so many different pieces to that puzzle. Weather is really something that hits every story that we touch.
Well, thanks, Nikki. We're so grateful that you're on, and you're right. And, you know, it almost makes me wish that every single person listening right now, especially our panelists, could all take like maybe a couple hours out one day and go join a farmer for a while and really go out in the rural areas and see what they do. Because, yeah, I mean, before I lived on a farm and moved here and got married, I have to admit, as a TV meteorologist, you know, we knew everyone was out there. We talked to everyone equally, but we focused largely on the megalopolis, the intense, densely populated areas, for instance, of Dallas-Fort Worth, and a lot of farmers, of course, live in outlying areas. But I don't know, maybe down the road, and we can certainly talk to Janice Bunting, our executive director of the NWA, about it, and who knows, maybe we can have some of us each spend some time out on a farm. I know I am, and really see, because this is not just, okay, fairy tale, this is real life. And when you see the implements, my husband has farming implements that wouldn't even fit in our living room. They're enormous, and they make a lot of decisions, spend a lot of time to travel these remote fields to do all their work. And if a forecast busts, which I know I'm talking to myself too, we've all done it, then you just can't believe how much it impacts. And so I'm going to go to our other farmer in just a moment. And Nikki, feel free to listen in when you've got to go in about 5 minutes. I know we'll just know that we really got some great input from you, and thank you. And I enjoy being on your staff, and the fence post is amazing. And I also want everyone to know that we just published a story about the NWA's big annual conference, and I sent that to Janice as well, and if you need that link. Greg Carbon also joined us. I don't know if he's just listening in. Greg Carbon is amazing. He's the warning coordination meteorologist for the Storm Prediction Center. So let me tell you what, he's looking at the entire lower 48 and beyond when there are storms of any scale all over the country. So he's a busy guy, and I'll have to see in a few moments if he wants to just listen in, or Mark, do you want us to give you a chance to, Greg, to chat, or do you want to just listen in for a while?
Hi, Amy. Thanks for your kind comments this morning, and I'm glad I could join you. I'm really just listening in, so good luck. Okay. And interesting topic, and I'm glad you've got an opportunity to air this information.
Oh, thank you, and we sure appreciate you being here. Greg's awesome, and he chaired our committee for I can't tell you how many years and did an amazing job. I want to get to Janice and Mike Mogul in a moment too, but first let me talk about our third farmer here, Mark Novak. It's spelled N-O-W-A-K. He's with us this morning from Wells, Minnesota. Mark, thanks for joining us. And if you could, a brief explanation. You were the first farmer to try the BTN Ag Weather Station. If you could give a brief explanation what it is and how it works, and do you think it's accurate? And let's see. I know we had him a moment ago. I'm looking at our panelists. Okay, we'll get back to Mark in a moment.
Am I good now?
Oh, hi, Mark. Yeah, if you could just give us, I know we're getting close to a half hour. We've still got several people I want to put in and especially answer farmer questions. But how do you like the BTN Ag Weather Station? And just for those of us who may not understand, just real quickly, you were the first farmer to try it out. Do you like it every day?
Well, I've obviously being a farmer, and weather is my nature. My wife says if I hadn't become a farmer, and I also spent 45 years as an ag lender, that I'd probably been a meteorologist. I love following weather and watching it. I was at the Farm Fest in Minnesota here in the summer of 2013, and Bryce Anderson was giving a talk, and he said, I'm not supposed to promote my company and my product, but we are excited today. We're introducing a brand new product called our BTN Weather Station. If you go to our booth 2 blocks down the street at the big farm show, take a look at it. My wife took me by the hand and said, Mark, we're going to go check that out. We went into the booth, and Chris Whitten Hill was there, and they talked about it, and he says, hey, this was just introduced today, an hour ago. If you sign up now, you'll be the first person in the country to sign up for the BTN Weather Station. I didn't hesitate. I signed up, and it was installed on September 6th of 2013. It's probably one of my...
changed your life. Yeah.
Well, it's probably one of my most used pieces of farm equipment. I mean, you got your tractor and your planter and your digger and your dryer and all those things. You use them periodically. I probably look at my weather station 90% of the days, especially during the growing season. I probably look at it nearly every day. And what I really use it for in the summertime is watching. It does calculate and monitor growing degree units up here in corn and soybean country. We want to know the progress of our crop. And I can pull the 30-year normal for the growing degree units from our University of Minnesota experiment station just up the road here, 30 miles. And it helps me monitor the progress of the crop. Now this year we thought we had a good-looking crop, and I was monitoring it all along, and I knew by the middle of August there was no doubt in my mind that we were going to be having a outstanding crop. And how does that impact me? I went to the elevator before the harvest when we still had a little bit better basis and says, I know I'm going to have bushels that I can't store at home. I need to bring that in, and I was going to lock in a little bit better basis. And I also have my custom operator. I hired my combining done, and he's always, Mark, I need to kind of know. I need to know my schedule when you're going to be ready. Based on watching those growing degree units, I could peg my soybean harvest within a day or two, and that's helpful in that regard. As far as accuracy, it's superb. I still do put a True V rain gauge in the farm where I have this. This farm where I have it located is 5 miles north of my home farm, and I do that just to double check if there's any malfunctions or anything going on. But over the 2.5 years I've had it, I have found it to be extremely accurate. And same thing with the rainfall. If you're in the planting season and you get an inch of rain, my experience being farming 42 years, I know basically how many days or hours you're going to have to wait before you can be back in the field. If it's only a 1/4 inch of rain, you know you're going to be back in there quicker. And sometimes I see neighbors that are out there pushing a little bit, and I'm thinking, I don't think that ground should be fit. We just had an inch of rain, and they're out there trying to plant in 36 hours later. And so I use that as a guide to determine when we should be planting. So yes, it's a very valuable tool. And the other thing I'm looking at now, and I've got a professional agronomist who helps me, and I do a lot of reading, and we're going to start looking at timing our spraying, especially our weed spray and our fungicide, based on growing degree units instead of, well, I think it looks right, I think the weeds look fit to spray. I think as we move into more precision ag issues, I think this issue of hitting the precision timing as precise as we can is going to be impacted by such things as the weather station that lets me look at growing degree units very accurately and very precisely.
Well, gosh, thank you so much, Mark. And I know I interviewed DTN about it too, and their meteorologist Bryce, as you mentioned, after he talked to you. I was excited you were the first person to use it, and it's similar to a Texas instrument, and it's calibrated, and they take it right out to the farm. So, you know, it's good to hear from somebody.
And I haven't had any issue with it other than the solar-powered battery. We had to replace that here about a month ago. I attended the DTN Ag Summit in Chicago about a month ago. I go to that every year. It's an outstanding summit. And there they talked about it, and they said they now have in excess of 4,000 of these units out on farms all across the country. And this has only been 2.5 years. I think they said the National Weather Service has something a little over 2,000 units, and I don't know how long they've been trying to build their array of stations, but we got to give DTN a lot of credit, because the more data and the more precision we have out here on localized areas, I think the more better decision making, and your meteorologist can maybe address that issue of how many, I mean, the precision of location after location of knowing what's going on a spot basis is probably pretty important.
Yeah, and you hit it on the mark, no pun intended there, but you really did, because it's all about microscale and more microscale. And Larry, our first farmer, was wondering, I guess one farmer to another, Larry, you're wondering.
Well, I'm just curious what the charge is for this service.
I pay $55 a month. I don't own the unit. I lease it. I pay it as a monthly charge through my DTN bill, and they maintain it and service it, monitor it. It's amazing, the technology, how when my battery was starting to go down a little bit, they could say, oh, we saw it spiking and rising, and yeah, we show the battery was not operating properly, so they recommended we get a new battery. So that's $55 a month, and I said it is more than paid for itself for me as far as I'm concerned, with the precision of knowing what my crop is doing, helping me making planting and marketing and harvesting decisions, and that's just another another push towards making more precise management decisions out here on the farm.
Oh, thank you so much, Mark. You know, and that brings me thinking about maybe a mesonet for more people. I know that when I interviewed Pete Spike, who spoke before, he's still with us on the call here. He's our citrus farmer in Florida that we've interviewed this morning. He told me, amazingly, they have a great mesonet, and it was with the National Weather Service years ago, and then it disbanded, so then they locally started it again. We've got Janice Bunting on our call, too. She's our executive director, the entire executive director of the National Weather Association. Janice, we're thrilled you're with us, and as head of our massive meteorological organization, what are your thoughts about increasing the efforts to create more microscale forecasts for the people who grow our food, farmers and ranchers? You think maybe a mesonet, another one, or what are you thinking?
Well, thanks for having me here today, Amy. I've enjoyed the conversation. I think it is becoming more crucial to have forecasts on a smaller scale of mesoscale levels, because agriculture relies on that so much, but there's a lot of other people that also rely on that, construction, manufacturing. So it is very important that we continue to improve our forecasts, and as those of us who are meteorologists know, the more data that we have going into the models, the better the models are going to be, as long as that data is good and quality controlled. So I think further improvement on wider, more implementation of mesonet systems across the country would be very beneficial to modeling and to forecasters in general, and also those people that use weather data. So I think it's important to continue improving our models, our increased number of weather stations, and including satellite data. We're going to be sending up GOES-R hopefully later this year, and with that we'll provide more data to models to improve the forecast as well. So I think it will benefit everyone in general, but I know that farmers especially need longer term forecasts that are more accurate to help them. So anything we can do to improve that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm going to also chat with Mike Mokel in a minute, but what Janice just said, and Dale, if you're with us here still, I think you are.
Yes.
Dale, you had talked to me about the fact that you really enjoy doing long-term forecasting, and so you were saying sometimes you go 2 weeks out, and I know Larry, our farmer, was asking, okay, how accurate are 2 weeks out? A lot of people say, oh, I've got this and that, and we'll predict. And I often hear so many farmers around here, sometimes there's a little bit of naysaying going on, but they're generally appreciative, so they're very forgiving. But there was another farmer I wanted to be on, Clay Scholda. He's a local farmer, and he has said before, his greatest quote is, I understand when a forecast isn't entirely results in fruition, but in 80%, he said, you really expect something out of 80%. And so what do you think about 80% or the long-term range? You can answer either one of those. I know I gave you two questions.
Yeah, I don't think the forecasts are quite there, 80%, as far as the longer range beyond, when you're talking beyond 2 weeks. It's a little lower than that, but there's definitely been progress made there in the last 10 or 20 years. I know when I started forecasting many years ago, the long range was considered probably 30 or 60 days, and now folks are making forecasts out a year and a half, and I wouldn't put, by the way, too much confidence in those forecasts, but I think we're pretty good out now through 3 to 6 months. You could put some stock in those forecasts. Now, I wouldn't bet the whole farm on those forecasts, that's for sure, but there is accuracy being shown now. We've learned how the ocean currents and so forth, some other factors that weren't known much about before, the relationship between those and the air currents over the continents. And so there's been a lot of strides made. There's still a long ways to go, and maybe some other folks have some comments on the long-range forecast as well.
Okay, and speaking of a comment, I want to go now to my colleague who's also co-hosting this morning, and Mike Mogul, certified consulting meteorologist, director of How the Weather Works and a summer camp, and Mike, of course, a member of the NWA, as we mentioned at the beginning of the program. And Mike, my enthusiastic meteorology colleague who jumped to help write the national story on agriculture weather with me and had just so much confidence that this was a really trending story and kind of an area, I don't want to say of neglect, because we always forecast for everyone, especially farmers, but now some other issues are coming to the forefront, and with all your research on the population exploding and in the years to come, Mike, and you recently gave a presentation at the NWA National Conference in October in Oklahoma City that I totally enjoyed being there, and you passionately suggested expanding the forecast area to 50 miles out. Can you say a few words about that?
Sure, Amy, and the rest of the folks here. I'm not showing up on the screen here. Let's see why not. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
Okay.
You are showing up.
All right, good. Well, what I presented at the NWA conference had to do with the fact that, as Greg Carbon knows from severe weather, typically we forecast severe weather within 25 miles of a point. When it comes to forecasting winter storms, we put out snowfall amounts, and there's no hint whatsoever that there's gradients involved in these winter storms. I'm pleased to report that last week a snowstorm hit southern Minnesota, and the forecasters out in Minneapolis emphasized snowfall gradients across the Minneapolis area in southern Minnesota, and they were right on with their snowfall forecasts and the gradients, and that was really useful information. Back in January, the big blizzard that was supposed to hit New York City but instead hit Long Island and Boston, that gradient was not played up in the forecasts, and we know what happened there. But I live in Southwest Florida, and we have a different problem down here. We don't have rain shadow effects. We don't have northeast type snowstorms or central plain snowstorms. We have sea breezes. And down here in Southwest Florida last year in Collier County, where I live, we had a rainfall gradient of 73 inches where the sea breeze was to 39 inches where the sea breeze wasn't in 5 miles. That's the annual rainfall in South Florida. No mountains, just the good old-fashioned sea breeze, almost a doubling of rainfall 5 miles away. And there's farms in there, and if there's not farms, there's golf courses. And down here, golf courses are every bit like farms. It can rain on one side, not on the other. And many of the golf courses down here actually have their own miniature rainfall networks, something like 6 or 10 rain gauges across the golf course, and they use that to decide where they're going to water in order to maximize the greenness but minimize fungus and mold. So there's a lot of microscale stuff going on. I even have a picture of an intersection here in Florida where it's rained on one side of the intersection and the highway is dry on the other side. And that type of microscale stuff transcends every farmer's comments we've heard this morning and every meteorologist's woes of missing a forecast or not having it rain at the airport, you know, that we say. So I'm big on data. The more the merrier, the more microscale the merrier, and whether it's radar or rain gauges, we've got to know about gradients, and I think that the DTN system is helping on that, but I think the smaller scale models as well, but when it boils down to it, it's got to be what falls in that rain gauge.
Okay. Mike, thank you so much, and I know we'll get back to you a little bit. And now we also have somebody else who joined us too, and that's Chris Carr, Barron Weather meteorologist. And Chris, I sure appreciate you being on, and I know in the beginning we had our farmers discuss their concerns, and Chris is a meteorologist with a degree in meteorology and minor in math from the University of South Alabama. Chris, when I interviewed Bob Barron, the CEO at Barron Weather, for the WeatherWise magazine story that Mike Mogul and I did about agriculture that's just out, Bob mentioned there are exciting developments in the works for ag weather at Barron. What different aspects would you say they're coming out now, and how does Barron's agriculture forecasts and graphics have been able to help farmers make their workday decisions?
Thanks for having me, Amy. And I think most of the people on this hangout probably are familiar with Barron from our severe weather detection technology. Kind of closer to the micro scale of identifying severe weather threats within storms, then tracking those threats out into the future. We have a great deal of expertise in regards to radar data processing, and to kind of chime in on what Mike had just discussed there in regards to rainfall gradients. I think one of the things that we're extremely excited about is dual pole radar and its ability to provide more accurate rainfall estimates at a very hyper local level, even down to subfield resolutions. So just kind of quickly give you an example. We did a study in Iowa in a field, and we had actual rain gauge data we received from that field, and we were able to see that there was just one gauge in that field, one rain gauge in the field. Meanwhile, there was a 0.8 of an inch rainfall variability across that field. That's a tremendous variability across that single field, and we're excited about dual pole's ability to more accurately detect and estimate rainfall accumulation, and then also taking that real-time estimates and feeding it into numerical model data, land surface modeling that is kind of grid-based. They can give us an idea of how that current precipitation is affecting soil conditions at a field level. So that's some of the stuff we've been working on at Barron, and I think it's exciting times in the industry. There's a lot of data out there, and a lot of agronomic data, a lot of weather data. A lot of your panelists have discussed what they're working on. I think it's kind of exciting to think about the future of weather in ag and kind of what we can do, kind of fusing all this content together to build decision support products for farmers.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and we're looking forward to hearing more about the latest from Barron too that's coming out.
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Everybody's talking about using the data that comes off of weather stations, and this raises a question in my mind, and that is, how do you all integrate data or information that's coming off of a private weather station into your models? I mean, it's one thing for the people to look at it and think about what it means and try to use their judgment, but is there a way to build a regression model that compares what the weather stations are measuring to what the forecast is to try to pinpoint that grid cell forecast a little bit tighter than an automated basis where people are not involved every day?
Sure, Pete, I can
How does that work? Yeah.
So what we do with weather stations, we actually combine it. We're running a 250 meter resolution dual pole rainfall rate right now today. We combine over 27,000 rain gauges into that estimate. So what we're talking about is the radar gives us a 17-acre resolution plot with really high accuracy that we then bias correct with the stations. We then take that same information, and every 30 minutes we combine the 27,000 stations we have in the U.S., and we produce this what's called the lapse analysis grid, where it takes into account all the standard state weather variables like temperature and dew point and wind, and we produce this grid that then initializes the model. So that initialization grid is important because if you don't start the model out with what's actually happening, you're going to have a cold start and it's going to cause errors in the forecast. So that's one way we take that data and put it into the model. And we serve that data out to a lot of ag companies today. And as I said, Chris was talking about dual pool. We already have that operationalized and it's already out on the market right now.
Okay, and thank you so much. Pete, does that help?
Yeah, in Florida, you mentioned our mesonet. It's the Florida Automated Weather Network FAWN, and it's something that we all got together to develop after the end of the fruit frost forecast. That was an old NWS product, and In fact, the distinction between a hard freeze and a freeze you see in the forecast is based on when citrus begins to freeze. It's 28 degrees is beginning of citrus damage, and that's why they call it a hard freeze as opposed to a freeze at 32. So we had an influence over everybody else inadvertently. But that Florida Automated Weather Network is maintained well, and that data is available and reliable. But how do you work in an individual grower weather station? Do you even try to do that, or you know, how does that work when the fellow may or may not be maintaining it right?
So how we do it is we actually do a QC process twice. We do a double QC process with gauges and once singly. And we actually have APIs. They're called automated program interfaces.
Hey, Tim, sorry to interrupt you. Can you
go ahead.
explain a little more? And I'm going to say English terms. Years
Sure.
ago, I was a medical reporter, and I had to get doctors to explain a little more in layman's, I guess, terms.
Yeah. No,
For
I'm
our
sorry. I
farmers.
tend to,
Yeah.
you know,
Okay, so
meteorologist.
you're very smart.
No, it's just, you know, it's hard to turn off that weather nerd part of me.
Yeah, I know. I know the feeling, too. I get around you guys, and I get all ramped up, too.
So basically, the station reports every 5 minutes, and it sends a signal back giving you what the weather is. We're able to network in and bring in private weather stations like Davis Instruments. That comes into our system. We quality control everything because we have a huge network of stations we're tapping in. And then what happens is that gets incorporated and blended with model data, terrain data, and then we reserve out that information in what's called a grid. So it's at, you know, 250 meters of rainfall to 17 acres or 2.5 kilometers with other base state variables. And that's how kind of the future of weather. It's incorporating the best of stations and model data together in what's now called a gridded weather product that then gets sent to the model. Does that kind of answer that question of how that works? I don't know. Hopefully that's down a little bit from.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you are doing it, in other words, and you figured out how. So that's cool.
Yep.
Just maybe if I could.
Yeah. Okay. Real quick, if you could, Chris. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I was just going to chime in there. You know, we do similar. We have a similar approach in that we do what's called rain gauge correction. We have an algorithm that compares what is sampled at the rain gauge to what the radar has indicated was the rainfall accumulation for that point, and we're able to correct our rainfall accumulation based off the official gauge. So it's a very similar approach, I think, to what the gentleman from WDT was talking about and discussing. You know, I think for kind of one of the key points here is that dual pole, I think, is a very important part of this whole process. And just so for some of our ag farmer people who joined us, for years we used what was called Doppler radar, which just basically sent out a horizontal pulsing. We made a lot of assumptions about the type of rainfall or the type of precipitation that was occurring within storms. One of those was that all of the objects within that storm were perfectly spherical, and we made rainfall estimates based off of that assumption. Because dual pole adds a vertical channel to that, we get more 3D looks within storms as to the density of precipitation, the size and distribution of drops, which gives us a more accurate assumption that we can then take and compare directly to official gauge data and clean up that product even more and make it even more accurate, train it over time to be better.
Well, thank you, Chris. I appreciate you a lot. And I'm just keeping a close eye on the clock. I know they've asked me to start winding down at 10 of, so I want to do that. I think Larry had one more question.
Maybe I'd like to add one more. I'd like to add one more thing real quick, if I could.
Oh, sure. Mark. Go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't say that. The data from the weather station can download to my computer or my smartphone, any place that I can access my DTN online. And so I can be any place in the country and see what's going on. In fact, a quick little story. Sometimes mental health is just as important as our physical health. In 2014, we had a very wet June. Crops were shallow rooted. then like weather does, all of a sudden late July, August comes and it's dry and we need a rain to keep the topsoil moist. And I was up vacationing up north, and 3 o'clock in the morning, for some reason I get up and I left home without much of a weather forecast for rain. Some chance, but wasn't that big, and I look and see we had a little over an inch of rain, and this is 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm on vacation, and that just created a euphoria for me because I knew that was going to help make the crop, and that all came from my weather station 300 miles away. And so sometimes the mental health part of farming is very important too, and that helps me.
Oh, absolutely, Mark. And Larry, you had one more thing you wanted to mention.
Oh, I just had something that you guys might think is humorous, but it's something that's been passed down from older generation of farmers around here and stuff, is that when you have a fog, for a long-term prediction, when you have a fog, that 90 days later you get moisture. And it's surprising how accurate that can be, because guys keep track of that, and within a few days of that 90-day period, it seemed like we get moisture. So I thought you might get a chuckle out of that. That's our long-term forecast.
Oh. Any chuckles on that end? I want to see the chuckles. All right. Now, I do want to mention that icon down there with the pasture and the cows, that's actually one of our farms here. And, well, I want to say before we run out of time that I totally appreciate all of you. And before I forget to mention this, I want to thank Jonathan Bellis, who is our NWA technology support on this webinar and recently earned his master's degree in meteorology. Special thanks to Jonathan. And all our panelists, thank you, Larry Hadacek, Pete Spike, Mark Novak, our farmers. You were tremendous, and I don't think this would have been anything near the degree of what it was today without you. Thanks to Nikki Work, the editor of the Fence Post. That was amazing. I didn't even realize publication went out to all 50 states. I knew it was a lot. Janice Bunting for having all the confidence in us for this webinar, our executive director of the NWA. And even though he didn't speak this time, he was listening very intently. Greg Carbon, our warning coordination meteorologist, who you would not believe all the things he does behind the scenes to forecast outbreaks across the country of weather, winter weather or spring. Dale Moeller from AccuWeather, thank you so much. You had great input. Tim Marquis from WDT, fabulous. Chris Carr, Barron Weather, very insightful. Mike Mogul, of course, my colleague, myself, Amy Gardner-Hadacek. And I hope I didn't forget anyone. Sometimes it happens when you mention everyone's names, but I think I've been asked to turn it back to Mike about 5 of, and it's 5 on the money. So I really appreciate all y'all so much. We worked really hard on this, and getting you all here has just made it all happen. Mike.
Okay, well, Amy, thank you for being on time. I'm going to do the easy one. I'm just going to thank everybody en masse. It's been a very informative seminar, way beyond my expectations, so I'm just like thrilled. But I want to summarize a couple things real quickly if I can. Ag weather is clearly not as sexy as tornadoes, hurricanes, and winter storms, but yet its importance almost transcends it because it's far more important on a larger scale. So I think this is very important. And I would like to see us, I know that there's sort of a hint in the background that we take this type of topic that we presented as a webinar and expand it to the NWA Conference this fall. And I'm going to work with Amy and with the program committee and see if we can have an ag presence at the NWA Conference in Virginia come September of 2016. But we've talked about improved resolution of satellites and radar, improved resolution of data sets, mesonets, whether they're proprietary or whether they're state-run or whether they're local. Integrating all of those is paramount, and we just sort of scratched the surface on that because some of the proprietary data does not get into the National Weather Service data stream, but yet a lot of it does because we have COCORAS, we have the FAWN network, and South Florida Water Management, for example, has a network. I know New York State and Oklahoma have state mesonets. So there's a lot of stuff going on in all different levels in terms of data sets. I know that since 2003, NOAA, working with the remote, I don't remember the name of it, it's NOHRS, something like that, up in Minnesota, has been doing snow mapping across the United States. And that's paramount in terms of looking at water supplies going forward into the spring and river flooding. So all of these things are helping the overall weather enterprise, if you will, in terms of the starting point. And now we have a target audience of agriculture, and I'm hoping that we can help meet the needs of that. I'm going to go visit my farmer in the next couple weeks because I have one here in Southwest Florida, and he's been after me to go visit him. So I'm going to take this this webinar as an excuse to go visit him and also get him to watch the webinar. Thanks again, everybody, for participating. I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan for closure, and let's see what we can do to make 2016 the best weather year ever.
Yeah, let me tell you, this has been a very interesting seminar. For me, I have very little experience in ag weather, so this was kind of the first taste or touch of it that I've had outside of maybe some conferences. But I do want to mention this webinar is being recorded on YouTube. The link is on there. You can search that through the National Weather Association. I again want to reiterate what Amy's already said and thank everyone that's been on today. I know for some of you out in Mountain Time or Western Time, or it's been very early for you. Again, I thank everyone for being on. If you have any questions, Mike Mogul has given me his email. You can see that here. You can go ahead and send email to him for any questions later on, or any of our other panelists as well. They are willing to give their contact information if necessary. Go ahead and email Mike for that information. So going forward, this is very tentative information, but I did ask Tricia, who is kind of running this sort of thing, for the next month. We're tentatively on for February 3rd. Don't hold me to this, but February 3rd, time TBA still, but we're shooting for February 3rd with the Weather and Forecast Committee hosting a webinar on decision support services on that date. So we look forward to there. Again, we'll be taking questions both on Mike's email and everywhere else. I hope to see you next month. Have a great day. Amy, do you have anything to add? One last comment?
Thank you so much. I know you were really wondering if I was going to make it on time. I said, having been in TV for 20 years or more, I'm a professional clock watcher, so I've been anxiously watching. I think everyone contributed immensely. And Janice, how do you feel about it, since you're overseeing not only our webinar but our entire organization?
Well, I think it was very educational. I think our members hopefully learned a few new things about agriculture, and maybe a lot about agriculture and the weather needs. And I just want to say that we had a good representation here of private sector meteorologists who provide specialized services for agriculture and many other services, and the Weather Service does provide an overall public service. So I think we had a good representation here today, so thank you to you all.
Yeah, and I thought it was really important to have the private sector, of course, since it has all been transferred, since 1996. So Barron and Chris and Tim and Dale, you all were just really helpful. And I guess if there's any final remark from anyone other than that, I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. And I see on our screen that Greg Carbon, our wonderful Storm Prediction Center meteorologist, mentioned that sometime in the spring he would like to maybe do something else on ag weather, and I think we're talking about it for future as well. So I know we'll be in contact with you all. So I don't want to run over time. Jonathan, thanks again for everything. You've made this all possible technologically, too.
No problem. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up. Again, this is recorded on YouTube, so we hope to see you on YouTube, on Google+, and everywhere else that the National Weather Association is. Have a great rest of your day, and thanks for viewing.